Hey y'all, it's me, Kevvie. So I recently read a book that truly changed my life. It's called Unmasking Autism. I don't think I've ever said this explicitly on my channel, but I am autistic. I've shied away from discussing it on the channel before because there are some people in my life who don't understand or support it, and their reactions have honestly made me very afraid to disclose to anyone else. But I'm just sick of not living authentically, and if this ruffles some feathers, so be it. This year, I've been really focusing on making all aspects of my life more accessible, easier to manage as an autistic person. Regarding BookTube, in order to make it more accessible to me, I need to change the way I make videos. Most of my videos are 100% scripted because the way my mind is wired, I can't go off the cuff. But because I want to be the good booktuber and have all the direct eye contact and woo between every sentence or part of a sentence, I have to pause, turn to my script, commit the next part of the sentence to memory before turning back to the camera to recite it. This makes each video twice as long to record, and then most of my editing is just cutting out those pauses. That's just become way too much for me, and I can't commit to it anymore. So here's what I propose to do going forward. I'm going to embrace the autistic stereotype of it all and not make eye contact. I'll still give the same energy and enthusiasm. I just will allow myself to stay looking at my script instead of all the back and forth. I feel really good about that, and I really hope y'all do too. Also, by the way, y'all, this week was my birthday. I am now 30. Oh my God. So happy birthday, Kevvie. In the description, you'll find links if you want to send me a birthday tip or a book off my wish list. My Patreon's down there too. Now let's talk autism. Autism is widely misunderstood, even by the people who diagnose and care for autistic people. Because of this, in the autism community, self-diagnosis is widely accepted. I know for other conditions, self-diagnosis can be problematic, but with autism, it's encouraged and even celebrated. Because not only is it incredibly difficult to obtain a diagnosis, many diagnostic professionals are using outdated and inaccurate stereotypes as the basis for diagnosis. And many actual autistic people don't fit these stereotypes and would therefore be incorrectly labeled not autistic. Additionally, there are many risks associated with having an official diagnosis. It could impede access to employment or housing or any number of things. So the reality is that for many autistic people, self-diagnosis is a safer and more accessible option. I would rather someone self-identify as autistic and find support and encouragement in our community, even if they aren't, than have autistic people unable to receive support they need due to semantics. Being more accessible and more inclusive is always the right call. This book contains a list of traits associated with what used to be known as female autism. It was called this under the false assumption that autism only occurs in little boys and looks like a monotone voice and an obsession with trains. These are better understood as the traits of masked autism. See, for many autistic people, especially women, people of color, and other marginalized communities, having visibly autistic traits can be a serious danger. So a lot of times, autistic people learn to mask those traits and present in a way that is more accessible by neurotypical standards. For people who are high masking, these are very common traits. Emotional traits. Strikes others as emotionally immature and sensitive, prone to outbursts or crying jags, sometimes over seemingly small things. Has trouble recognizing or naming one's feelings, ignores or suppresses emotions until they bubble up and explode, may become disturbed or overwhelmed when others are upset, but uncertain how to respond or support them, goes blank and seems to shut down after prolonged socializing or when overstimulated. Psychological traits. Reports a high degree of anxiety, especially social anxiety. Is perceived by others as moody and prone to bouts of depression. May have been diagnosed with mood disorders such as bipolar disorder, or personality disorders such as borderline or narcissistic personality disorder before autism was discovered. Fears rejection intensely and tries to manage how other people feel to avoid it. Has an unstable sense of self, perhaps highly dependent on the opinions of others. Behavioral traits. Uses control to manage stress, follows intense self-imposed rules, despite having an otherwise unconventional personality. It is usually happiest at home or in a familiar, predictable environment. Seems youthful for their age in looks, dress, behavior, or interests. Prone to excessive exercise, calorie restriction, or other eating disordered behaviors. Neglects physical health until it becomes impossible to ignore. Self-soothes by constantly fidgeting, listening to repetitive music, twirling hair, picking at skin or cuticles, etc. Social traits. Is a social chameleon. Adopts the mannerisms and interests of the groups they're in. May be highly self-educated, but will have struggled with social aspects of college or their career. Can be very shy or mute, yet can become very outspoken when discussing a subject they are passionate about. Struggles to know when to speak when in large groups or at parties. Does not initiate conversations, but can appear outgoing and comfortable when approached. Can socialize, but primarily in shallow, superficial ways that seem like a performance. Struggles to form deeper friendships. Has trouble disappointing or disagreeing with someone during a real-time conversation. Now let's say I read out this list and a lot of things on it ring true to you. If that's the case, there's a chance you've been autistic your whole life and never knew it. If so, I have a resource I recommend checking out. It's called the RADS-R test. This multiple choice test is becoming one of the top diagnostic tools used by professionals to diagnose autism because it is shockingly accurate. If you score over 62 points, you are likely autistic, and most of the time people score either way above or way below that threshold. For example, my Aunt Jan, when she took the test, scored a 15. I scored 178. I encourage everybody to take this test because even if you aren't questioning if you're autistic, the worst case scenario is you only find out what you already knew. The best case is you learn something new about yourself, and now all the reasons you felt isolated your entire life finally start to make sense. Before I go further into discussing the book, I wanted to lay a few more ground rules when discussing autism moving forward. First off, you've likely heard people say that you're supposed to say person with autism instead of autistic person. Person first language versus identity first. For the most part, the people loudly advocating for person first language are not autistic themselves, but families of autistic people who consider autism to be a burden or a shameful thing. But among actually autistic people, the preference is identity first language. Yes, we are people, but autism affects every aspect of our lives and who we are in our core. You can't separate the autism from the person, hence identity first. Also, while Autism Speaks is the best known and most largely supported autism organization, the autism community considers them to be a hate group. They have no autistic people on their board, and their objective isn't to support autistic people, it's to eradicate autism. But that can't happen without eradicating autistic people. They've even done marketing campaigns where they have a mother of an autistic kid sobbing, saying in front of her child that she would rather have a dead kid than an autistic kid. Can't imagine how much that must have hurt. Instead of finding a cure for something that doesn't need to be cured, we need to change the current systems or build new systems that support the needs of neurodivergent people. If our society was built in a way that was accessible to people whose brains work a little different, then autism wouldn't even be a disability. It would just be a marker, a label, or an identity. Similarly, one of the most common treatments for autistic children is applied behavioral analysis therapy, also known as ABA. Despite its pervasiveness, most autistic people consider it to be not just harmful, but abusive. It's a similar problem to gay conversion therapy. The individual doesn't fit society's expectations of how a person should be or act, but instead of developing a system to support those differences, they are shamed and coerced into behaving normal. Now, before upsetting any autism moms watching, I just want to say that if you have participated in ABA for your child, I'm not blaming you or calling you a bad person. You listened to your medical professionals and made the most informed decision you could with the information you had. I understand. Also, the blue puzzle piece has been commonly used as the symbol for autism, but because of its associations with Autism Speaks, the color blue suggesting it's a male condition, and the implication that autistic people have a piece missing and are not inherently whole individuals, it has fallen out of favor. The autistic community prefers the rainbow infinity symbol because we are each of us whole individuals full of potential. Now, I spent a lot of time discussing what's bad. Let me switch to what's good. Here's some resources that can help you be more informed about autistic realities. First of all, there's the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. In the description, I'll have a link to their fantastic resource library. Now, my next recommendation may sound strange, but trust me, the best autism research is happening on TikTok. Using hashtags like actually autistic, thousands of autistic people are for the first time able to find each other and easily find commonalities in each other's experiences. TikTok truly is an unparalleled resource for learning about the autistic experience. The autistic community is also very queer. There's a significant overlap between autism and trans communities. Laura Kate Dale, author of Uncomfortable Labels, Gender Euphoria, and Me and My Dysphoria Monster, is both trans and autistic, and just released a new book called Stories of Trans Joy. I haven't read it yet, but it seems similar to Gender Euphoria in premise, but with a focus on autistic identities instead of trans ones. And a couple of years ago, there was a book published called Spectrums, Trans Autistic People in Their Own Words, edited by Maxfield Sparrow. It's a collection of essays by trans autistic people, and it is really eye-opening. The biggest selling point for it, though, is that I am one of the authors published in that collection. Yeah, y'all, I have my work published in a real physical book. Yet I never mentioned it on my channel because I was so afraid to share my autism publicly. It's definitely not my best work. I had 2 essay ideas and I went with the safer, easier subject. Despite that, it's still an excellent collection and well worth a read. So while I've known I was autistic for a few years now, I didn't bother to pick up Unmasking Autism until recently. See, as part of my healing process, I'm learning to embrace who I am as an autistic person. And part of that means coming out as autistic to the people around me, something I've been too afraid to do for years. But then I thought about an earlier coming out, when I told my family I was trans. My Aunt Jan was by far the most supportive person in that process, immediately going out and reading any resource she could get her hands on, so she could be the best ally and advocate she could be. I knew that if anybody would be receptive of my latest coming out, it would be her. So I picked up this book and filled it with notes to explain how all these topics related to my experience. Like, here, let me show you some. See, there's my opening letter to her. Oh, there's our author, Devon Price, trans and autistic, like me, and from Chicago, like me. One of my favorite things in this book was this values-based integration process. It's all about figuring out who are you really, what do you really believe and stand for, and what motivates you, and how to live a life that aligns with those things. The first prompt in that exercise is to think of 5 moments in your life where you felt fully alive. And as I was doing that, a theme became apparent. I, growing up, felt most alive when I was unobserved, when I knew nobody was watching me or judging me or caring about how I was behaving or acting, when I could really just let loose and just be myself for a goddamn minute. That really made me reevaluate a lot of stuff and realize so much of my day-to-day existence is about catering to others, pleasing others, and my needs and my wants get the short end of the stick, always. Chapter 4 was a big one for me, the cost of masking, because while autistic people are spending every second of every day being hyper-conscious of how they are perceived and how they need to behave in social situations, that takes everything they have out of them. So every social situation involves so many more steps and so much more cognitive work and physical work, to the point where we get exhausted and burnt out. Autism burnout is a very real thing that a lot of us are dealing with. I am deep in autism burnout where I'm so overwhelmed by everything all the time, and just everything is challenging now because I no longer have the resources to expend because I'm just burnt out. Ooh, I loved this section under cultivating autistic relationships, which talks about communication needs, because autistic people have a real hard time communicating with people who are neurotypical because there's so much subtext and social rules in how you communicate that just don't make sense to autistic people. They'd rather just be direct and to the point. And that, for a lot of people, is socially unacceptable or inappropriate. So in here, they break down, these are the needs that autistic people need for communication and examples of how to support that need. So yeah, this book, it goes beyond just your internal stuff, but also how to live as an autistic person in society and how to support autistic people out in the world. So colorful. I love it. This was just a random tangent I went on because thinking about autism so much while reading helped me come to this realization. While a lot of autistic people have sensory sensitivities, especially to harsh lights or loud noises, things like that, turns out I'm very sensitive to touch and touching specific objects and types of objects or materials. And that seriously impacts the way I can engage with the world. Most of my life, people would just say, oh, she's a germaphobe, but that never felt quite right. I wasn't like, oh, my hand's dirty. It was, if I touch the wrong thing, there is a sensation on my hands that will not go away until I scrub them clean. It was amazing to finally understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just some weird bullshit. It was just my autism giving me sensory sensitivities. And now that I know that, I can work with that and accommodate it. This book fucking changed my life. Everybody should be reading this book because there's a good chance that if you're not autistic, you won't know a lot of these things about autism. There's still so much in here that helped me learn about myself, and it could help you better understand yourself as well. It's also fully researched and has all its sources cited so that you can do any further research you want from this. Because this book became a sort of buddy read with Aunt Jan, I invited her to come on here and share her thoughts on it.
Hi, I'm Aunt Jan, and I have a RADS R score of 15, which means I'm very neurotypical. I recently read Unmasking Autism because Kevvie asked me to read it. When she gave me the book to read, she prefaced it with, "Keep an open mind." I thought, oh boy, here we go. I'm a nurse. And I was a school nurse in a high school for over 20 years. So I've worked very closely with autistic children and teens, and I felt I had a pretty good handle on what autism is. When I started reading the book, the first thing that really jumped out at me was that the author used the term autistics and referred to themselves as autistic and as others as autistics. In both my medical and educational training, it was always stressed that we should say a person with autism or a person with a disability rather than an autistic person or an autistic. And so it took a little getting used to. The author's definition of autism is very broad and inclusionary, and was very different from what I had learned and believed. I found myself getting angry when I first started reading the book, and I couldn't figure out why. It was just triggering a very odd response in me. As I continued to read and learn more about neurodivergence and autism, the anger started to subside, and I started to get what the author was talking about. I realized that my anger was due to cognitive dissonance because what I was learning was very inconsistent with what my long-held beliefs were. The book caused a real paradigm shift in me, and my views of autism and neurodivergence really changed. It gave me a better understanding of the traits, characteristics, the behaviors, and more importantly, the challenges that autistics face on a daily or even moment-to-moment basis. I've also, after reading the book, been secretly diagnosing people that I know with autism, and it's actually helping me to understand and accept some of their quirks. I still have a lot to learn because I've basically had to wipe clean my autism slate and start all over from scratch. Kevvie and I have had discussions, and some of her real life experiences and examples have really helped me to get a better understanding of what it means to be neurodivergent. I know that she's going to help me continue to learn. If you think you know what autism is, I'd caution you, as Kevvie did me, to keep an open mind when you're reading Masked Autism. And if you already understand what autism and neurodivergence is, the book will really help you to validate your beliefs.
Thank you so much, Jan, for sharing that with us and for being such a loving and accepting person in my life. All right, now here's an idea. Because this is kind of a big announcement, let's follow it with a Q&A. In the comments, leave your birthday wishes as well as any questions you might have about autism or any other questions you have for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah! I'm 30.